Hello there. So good to see you, Facebook family and friends. Welcome to the KHOU 11 newsroom. We are now just about 24 minutes away from a really special project, our Juneteenth special, Juneteenth 1865 to 2021. And tonight we're going to talk behind the scenes and the backstory. And joining me are the two leading ladies behind the scenes, behind this special project. Jennifer Moore, executive producer,
Hello.
and Nicole Jones, producer. Let me tell you, these are two of the hardest working ladies in the business. They were producing newscasts on a daily basis, overseeing newscasts, and then logging countless hours into this special. We're going to talk about what all that time involved. But up first, I want to invite you. What do you know about Juneteenth? When did you first learn about it? Have you learned about it? This is the whole intention of us doing this project, is to educate people. So go ahead in comments. Let us know when you first learned about Juneteenth, what you knew. With that said, I'm going to turn it over to you ladies and let you know. Oh, did you get your Facebook connected? She wanted to share that live. We want to make sure we share this live. Yes. So I'm making sure I'm connected here. So Jen, kick us off.
Yeah.
When did you first learn about Juneteenth?
So I first learned about Juneteenth when I was around in high school. I'm from Ohio, Cincinnati, Ohio, and every year we do have a Juneteenth celebration there. And so I come to Texas and I'm like, wait, it happened here. Like, I'm working in the market where it actually happened. And so my mom told me about it as well growing up. So it's so interesting with doing this project, the stories of people. It doesn't matter your race, where you came from, whatever. People have different stories as to when they learned about it. And so that's the whole point of this project, is just being able to educate people, get us all on one accord, but then look at the bigger picture, which I'm excited about with this special.
Yeah, I think it's so wonderful that you had a history with Juneteenth. Nicole, what about you?
So I'm from Richmond, Virginia, and it wasn't until I went to college that I learned about Juneteenth. I went to a historically black college, North Carolina A&T in Greensboro. Shout out to the Aggies.
Gotta get that in.
So it wasn't until I went to college that I really learned about Juneteenth. And it wasn't until I moved here and started working here that I realized how much Houston and Galveston played a role in Juneteenth. So this, like Jay Moore said, this has been a learning experience for myself as well, just learning about Houston and Galveston's role.
And all these communities that we drive through all the time, that we frequent, right? And all the history that lives there. So I grew up, to let you folks know about when I first learned about Juneteenth. So I'm a native Houstonian, proud Houstonian, with family in Liberty County and all across the city. But when I was growing up, we would go to a rodeo around Juneteenth. I remember because it was my cousin's birthday. So we would go, and oftentimes it would be a Juneteenth rodeo. So that's where I really first learned about it. Honestly, I don't think my parents ever said, now let's sit down and tell you about Juneteenth. I just learned from that experience. And then I've covered Juneteenth so much working in Texas and around Texas, and especially in Southeast Texas. But in the past 22 years that I've worked in Houston, I've covered the story so much, but yet there was still so much I learned
so much more
these past several weeks. So it's been fascinating. And I want to give you guys a little bit of a backstory here with Juneteenth to educate you more before the special. It is here in Southeast Texas that we've been talking about where this history happened. We take you from Galveston to Houston and back again. Galveston really is the birthplace of Juneteenth, when General Gordon Granger arrived on the island with Union soldiers and announced General Order 3, letting enslaved people know that they had been freed. Now, this, interestingly, happened in 1865. The Emancipation Proclamation was signed in 1863. So this happened 2 years later. Why so? Well, we want you now to listen to a historian who explains why it took so long.
There were all these myths and stories about what happened and why it took 2.5 years for the word to reach Texas. Plantation owners in Texas were well aware of the Emancipation Proclamation, but they ignored it. What they cared about was maintaining the agrarian economy in Texas, and that was solidly based on cotton. And to maintain that, they needed slave labor.
All right, so that was Professor Hurd with Prairie View A&M University, and we'll hear from him all throughout.
He gave great sound.
This special.
As us TV people say.
Yes, he gave great interviews. So let's give people insight into how do we even know who to contact and talk to? How did you make those connections?
Well, at first it just started off with research, right? Going through experience of since the 2.5 years that I've been here, going to Emancipation Park and meeting the people that work there, meeting people who lived in the community is actually what opened my eyes. When I first moved here, I remember going to a play invited by some friends at Emancipation Park, and it was about Freedmanstown. And I'm like, what is this Freedmanstown? And then hearing from my friends saying, oh, you don't know about the bricks. And I'm like, what's the bricks? And it just opened my eyes. And then working here, and then we were doing Juneteenth stories, you start to meet different people, but you also have to do the research. We have all kinds of different places to look at, from Galveston to Emancipation Park, the city of Houston, all around Missouri City. I mean, we just have such a wealth of knowledge here that we just don't realize is in our backyard. The stories that we were finding, I mean, it was just so hard, honestly, cutting it down because,
we had like 1,000 hours worth of sound. I think that was the hardest part because I noticed, like, as we went through the editing process, we all were like, but this is so good, but no, this is important. So
everyone lobbies for what they think was the most amazing sound. And it was also good. I mean, that's the thing. I was talking to another colleague of ours who screened the special, and he said, everyone was so good. A lot of times you cast a wide net, you're hoping to bait a lot of fish. We know some people are just more comfortable on camera, others are not. Every single person that we spoke to, whether they were a historian or a longtime community member, they were so compelling with their stories and their information that they had.
And that's what we had to do. We had to really just find the people who had the stories, who had the connections, who either had family or friends who grew up in these areas, or themselves are the descendants of people who have been in Freedmanstown. And Houston is such a beautiful city that has so many different people from different cultures and backgrounds that come here, a lot of transplants. So a lot of people don't know. And what was surprising to me as well is a lot of people who are from here are not very familiar. Like, they might have heard about it in school, like a paragraph or just a mention of it, but not necessarily knew the backstory and how it's kind of crazy to me how people who were once property were able to not only find a place for freedom, but then to build and say, we want a park, we're going to build schools, we're going to build businesses, we're going to just take control of our lives that we didn't have control of before and go to the exponential power.
It's interesting. So we're hearing from some different folks about their experiences and when they first learned about, of course, Juneteenth. And for a lot of people, it wasn't until much later in life. I know that one person, getting your comments pulled up here so I can directly give you directly attribute your comments to you. Let's see here, pulling it up. Kendall Jackson says she's very excited to see this special. I know she had learned about it from her parents, but parents very, very well read, though, in the subject matter as well. See, Alvin Elementary, 1968.
Nice.
Well, here's the thing. Not educated about the true history, right? So there are so many people who can relate to not knowing about this and this happening and transpiring within their communities. So we talked to people about, when the slaves learned they were freed, but we bring the story all the way forward to 2021, and there's so much in between there. I know we talked about the civil rights movement and the role,
Jim Crow.
And Jim Crow,
voting rights.
It's just so interesting because sometimes I think when we talk about Juneteenth, we focus just on that time period, which is important, right? We should know what happened. But there's a connection that even brings us to today about what happened then and then what happened afterwards. Because just like I said, they were able to create all these great things, but then obstacles immediately came right after. And I don't think people even recognize or realize. We hear these histories here and there, but it's not really taught. And we talk about that. It's not really taught. And so our goal, we all talked about this, is to make sure that people just walk away learning something new. And if that can happen, I am just so thankful, because it's just about education.
You mentioned Jim Crow laws, and that's where I learned something new. Like I said, I've covered this for decades. So I went into this project thinking there's a wealth of information that I know and that I can share. But what I learned about Jim Crow laws, where Jim Crow laws were established, who was Jim Crow?
So I thought he was a lawmaker.
I thought he was an African-American man, but as you'll learn tonight during the special, Jim Crow was actually a minstrel character. So back in the late 1800s, minstrel shows were the most popular form of entertainment. And these were essentially white immigrant men who would dress in blackface, and they would perform and entertain and mock African-American people then. And eventually, the white community started associating this character and this name with black people. And then in Boston, of all places, in the North, where segregation laws first started and originated, did not know. It started on the trains there in Boston, and the name of the laws became Jim Crow. What people associated with African Americans.
The Jim Crow section, because that's where the black people are, and so forth. And look how far it's gone. You know, we know that as a whole era. And that Jim Crow era happened immediately after Juneteenth.
Yes, and so I think it's information like that that you'll be enlightened and privy to tonight. There are also, you know, when talking with people, this is a difficult history, right? And I think that's one reason why people are often reluctant to even teach it, because it is difficult, it is hard.
It's funny you say that, because one soundbite that I remember from the special is from Dr. Steptoe, and she said she feels like one reason why it's not taught is because it's an uncomfortable conversation, and I don't want to say we have to get over that, but we do almost. We have to start having that uncomfortable conversation in order to move forward.
Because you know what, some of our interviewees, they talked about how, I guess in the 60s when there was integration, there was a push even from African Americans to not celebrate Juneteenth, because the thinking was, hey, we're finally coming together, you know, why, let's not worry about that. But I know Jacqueline Bostick told us, no, you have to talk about it so you don't repeat the past. We always talk about the Holocaust. I mean, I remember as a kid visiting the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C., and the imprint it's left on me, seeing that. And as a society, if we recognize and face those things head first, the goal and the hope is that those things never happen again. Now, some people may say, oh, that's so drastic, slavery, that won't happen again. Well, if you really do your research, there's still slavery across the world. And you never know, as far as just groups of people not having access. And let's call a spade. African Americans have had a lot thrown at them throughout history, and we're finally getting somewhere, but there's still a lot to get done. And as long as we know our history, I think that better preps us and preps our future for more.
Yeah, we live in the most diverse city in the country, right? And I think it's so important for all of us to learn about everyone's history, whether it's African American history, Mexican American history, Irish American history. We should all know each other's history, and Juneteenth is a very big part of the African American experience and history here. Okay, the things that will stay with you and resonate with you after this project, ladies. I know, a tough one. All right, well, you're doing that.
I do want to say, I think it's so, like, I don't know if divine is the word or ironic that today the Congress passed Juneteenth as a holiday, and now it's on its way to the president. Like, how ironic that today that happened.
It's great. And I think what I'll take with me is just the fact that you can hear the actual stories of people and connect the end of slavery with the actual person and different people and families and communities, as opposed to this entity that just seems so far away and disconnected and not accessible. And here in Houston, we literally walk, and we don't know. We're literally walking by. I mean, I stumbled onto Freedmanstown when I first moved here because I was at a restaurant and I was parked on a side street and I recognized the bricks. And I start driving and I'm like, and that also happened today, that the council passed that Freedmanstown is a
heritage district.
Exactly. So it's beautiful to see all this. And I just really hope that people can share the story. Now people don't have to walk around saying, what exactly is Juneteenth? And I wanted to make it clear to people, there's a lot of African Americans who do not know Juneteenth, especially depending on what part of the country you're from. It's not really discussed or heard about.
And here in the Houston area, so many of us recognize Juneteenth and associate it with festivals and barbecues and celebrations. So for a lot of African American Houstonians, it is something that they grew up with. But tonight you can have a deeper understanding of what you are celebrating at these festivals and at these barbecues, the history that is there. Nicole, I want to piggyback off of something that you said. You know, we've been talking about Congress passing Juneteenth as a federal holiday. It is a state holiday. Texas was the first state to make it a holiday. Rightfully so, because Juneteenth happened here. So you'll learn more about that within this special. We're going to journey from, like I said, Galveston back to Houston and bring you all of these beautiful stories. Our ladies behind the scenes, Jennifer Moore and Nicole Jones, our producers extraordinaire. Folks, be sure to tune in. That is coming up tonight at 8 o'clock. Real quick before we go, just want to give a few shout outs. Penny Tilley said, I grew up in the Midwest. I moved to Galveston at age 18 in 1961. When someone explained Juneteenth, I fell in love with it. So Texan, isn't that something? Lori Vizzini says, thank you for doing this. You are so very welcome. It is our honor. We've really enjoyed doing this project as well. Deborah Marshall says, I grew up in Louisiana. We were not taught at all. Our daughters learned here in Houston at school, but it still was not taught with all the facts. History. Well, we are teaching all the facts. That is tonight on KHOU, Juneteenth, 1865 to 2021, coming up here in about 7 minutes. We'll see you then.